Greetings. This is a guide for a dual-wielding melee Shadow Monk build that I use to solo tactician, specializing in high mobility and stealth. Unlike other popular builds, this multi-class is reliant in knowledge of enemy AI behavior, stealth mechanics, and strategic positioning, as you do not have the benefit of high AC and high damage. At least, not until Act 3, thanks to a special late-game armor, which will be discussed later in the video, along with other core items. And since this is a melee build, you would not enjoy the safety that comes from playing a ranged character. Now, on to the most important part of the video, the level guide. There are two ways to start a Shadow Monk in my opinion. Start as a thief, if you're open to respecking, or start as a monk. Either way, there's not much variance in classes this early in the game, but if you're going solo with a Shadow Monk character, you would rely heavily on making ranged attacks, either with daggers coupled with Tavern Brawler, or with your ranged weapon, as going melee solo in Tactician is almost always a death sentence. Now for the beginning stats, I'd highly recommend maxing Dexterity and Constitution for Dex 17 and Const 14, and spreading the points to other stats to however you see fit. Dexterity, obviously, as this build will dual-wield short swords. Rolling high initiative in combat is also a priority. And the Constitution for the concentration saving throws for whenever we're casting darkness or other concentration spells like haste. Moving on to level 2, you get Patient Defense, Step of the Wind Dash, and Step of the Wind Disengage, useful tools for when the situation calls for mobility. Especially useful in solo runs for when enemies engage you in melee, allowing you to escape without provoking attack of opportunity. I should note that the main strategy in solo runs with this build this early in the game is to waste the enemy's action points dashing towards you while you cut away. More on this later. On to level 3, we pick Shadow Monk. You get Hide as a bonus action, the Darkness spell, a Silence spell, and Pass Without a Trace. You also get the passive ability to deflect missiles as a reaction. Additionally, you also get Minor Illusion as a cantrip, which is extremely useful in luring enemies in advantageous locations. On to level 4, you get your first feat. Picking Savage Attackers grants you nice consistent damage throughout the entire game. Another competitive choice is Alert, to ensure you always go first. If you're doing a solo run and don't have trouble respecking, you may want to go Tavern Brawler paired with Strength Elixirs for throwing daggers, or Sharpshooter for +10 on ranged attacks. Just make sure to take back Savage Attacker for whenever you hit the crease. On to level 5. Shadow Monks get an extra attack as well as 2 new abilities, Stunning Melee Strike and Stunning Unarmed Strike. These are especially useful both in a party and a solo run for disabling targets for a turn. In level 5, Shadow Monks also get a core ability, Cloak of Shadows. This is probably one of the most powerful skills in the entire game. This allows the Shadow Monk to sneak into advantageous positions, trespass into heavily guarded areas, and most overpowered of all, to exit combat, which wastes all enemies' turns, all with just an action point. Just make sure to be mindful of shadows, as this skill only world when you are lightly or heavily obscured. And make sure to move away from the spot you use the Shadow Cloak from, so you won't lose invisibility from Detect Presence. On to level 6, this would be our last level for Shadow Monk. By this time you should be finishing Act 1. Shadow Monks get Shadow Step, another core skill that makes this build work. Later I will discuss how to use this effectively. On to level 7, the Shadow Monk is finally online. We multi-class into Rogue to get Sneak Attack. By this time you should be already at Krisha Clear, giving you access to the Braceful Cloth and Knife of the Undermountain King. These 2 items would serve you until the end of Act 2. On to level 8, another point to Robe. We get Dash, Disengage, and Hide as a bonus action. but these are pretty much useless when we have Shadow Step. Just make sure to always be obscured. On to level 9, we get to pick our subclass for Rogue. The Thief subclass is great for our build as it gives us 2 bonus actions. Going Assassin is the best option if you want to abuse Cloak of Shadows to exit and re-enter combat. For level 10, we put another level into Rogue, giving us another feat. There are a couple of good options if you want to stick to melee dual wielding. I recommend Alert, as it guarantees you go first against high initiative enemies in the late game. At long last, the final 2 levels would be spent on 2 fighter modes, allowing you to have 2 weapon fighting and action surge.
Now for the items, I'll be discussing the items per act, starting with the first act. Once you reach the Mountain Pass area, the Shadow Monk should finally be online with Cloak of Shadows and Shadow Step. If you're doing a solo run with this build, this means you can finally let go of the ranged kiting and finally be a melee character. These would be the ideal items you should end up with. Most of these should last the Shadow Monk. The final parts of Act 1 all the way until the end of Act 2, with few substitutions along the way. Starting off with the Knife of the Undermountain King, equipped in the main hand, this should be a huge power spike to the damage output the monk thanks to its passive that lowers critical ranges and allows for a reroll on damage rolls of 2 and below. You can't dual wield at this point yet, so offhand, weapon doesn't matter as much. However, Short Sword of First Blood should provide a nice offhand attack should you need it. Shadow of Menzoberranzan looks cool and would allow you to cast invisibility without the obscured conditional that Shadow Cloak has. This should provide some fail-safes should you find yourself in dangerous positions. The Graceful Cloth helps with a nice stat boost as well as give the Nimble as a cat passive. If you're running a Dirge character, Deathstalker Mantle is insanely overpowered for the build as it gives you invisibility upon enemy kill. If you're fine with trivializing most fights, this should be a must-have in your playthrough. Bracers of Defense are good if you don't want to equip the Shadow of Menzoberranzan as it gives you extra AC. Gloves of Inhibited Kushigo paired with Elixir of Strength are good for making ranged attacks with throwing weapons like daggers. Boots of Speed are great as you don't really have access to dash as a bonus action this early in the game. Disintegrating Nightwalkers are redundant as you already have Shadow Step but are good early game if you don't have Shadow Step yet. Smuggler's Ring for pickpocketing and stealth checks is always welcome. Sentient Amulet for when you want to restore some key points and you don't want to consume a short rest charge. Moondrop Pendant is good early game, so that you could always escape from melee enemies when you are below 50% HP Amulet of Misty Step. Again, redundant with Shadow Step, but very good escape and positioning tool early game when you don't have access to Shadow Step yet. Finally, we move on to Act 2 items. You want to rush getting Gloves of the Balanced Hands so that you could finally dual wield and attack with your offhand. Cloak of Protection for extra AC and saving throw. This is acquired from the last light-in area along with the Gloves of Balanced Hands. Justicier's Scimitar is extremely good as it can blind enemies on hit, giving disadvantage in their attacks against you, as well as enabling you to run away without triggering attacks of opportunity. Amulet of Harpers is extremely good for survivability, especially in solo runs. Eversight Ring, one of the core items for the build, it gives you immunity to the blind that your darkness gives, allowing you to fight inside it without dipping 2 levels in Warlock. Very, very good. This ring should last you the entire game. And finally, the Risky Ring, another core item. This allows you to sneak attack every single round, even without crouching. Another keeper that would last the entire run. Finally, moving on to Act 3, the Helmet of Grit is insane, as it gives you a bonus action when you are below 50% HP without the Thief subclass. This is a crucial item as it gives you the option to switch your Rogue subclass into Assassin, allowing for an explosive Alpha Strike round that should wipe out scores of enemies. This is up to you. Palest Armor is the armor from the quest line, Investigating the Murders. I suggest rushing this core item after you get into the lower city, as this makes it so any enemies within 2 meters of you are vulnerable to piercing damage. With this armor and the Assassin subclass, you can finally outdamage even the Paladin builds. Remember, vulnerability doubles every damage roll, not total damage, but every damage roll. Complete game changer. Cloak of Displacement for when you are caught out in the open. This offers very good survivability, as it imposes a disadvantage on the first attack roll towards you. Amulet of Baal allows you to inflict bleeding, which helps the success rate of your stunning strikes. Dolor Amaris goes hard with the Assassin subclass, dealing an extra 7 damage, which is doubled with the Palest Armor, dealing an extra 14 damage. When you defeat Orin, you should finally get the final pair of weapons you'll ever need in this build. Crimson Mischief is an insane piercing weapon with 4 whole damage rolls. Remember the vulnerability from Palest Armor? Now you get to double every single damage roll from Crimson Mischief. Now pair that with the guaranteed critical strike from the Assassin subclass, and you'll one-shot anyone with 1 hit. Extremely powerful. Bloodthirst is another drop from Orin. This increases your crit range by 1, and increases your armor class by 1 when wielded in the offhand. When wielded in the main hand, it gives vulnerability to piercing damage. Pretty redundant with Palest Armor. Finally, the Hell Dusk gloves for another damage roll of fire damage on melee attacks. That's pretty much it with the items. If I missed a better option in any stage of the game, I apologize. But these are the items I used in my solo tactician run. For the Illithid powers, the only ones that are relevant for this build are Luck of the Far Realms and Cull the Weak.
With those concluded, we move on to the most fun part of the guide, the Shadow Monk's abilities. I'll try to be quick and concise with the strategies and tactics of this section. Shadow Step Kiting. Utilizing the immense range of Shadow Step, the Shadow Monk is able to teleport to extreme distances, so long as the location is obscured. The main combo with this is to hit someone for as much as you can, while reserving a bonus action for a Shadow Step to safety, and then running away until your movement has run out. This would waste the enemy's actions to use dash to catch up to you, leaving them with nothing else to do. There are exceptions to this, mainly enemies that can dash as a bonus action, or misty step to you, hasted enemies, or ranged enemies in general, so be sure to save up bonus actions accordingly. Ranged enemies are especially dangerous. Be sure to utilize cover, as they will still be able to hit your Shadow Monk, even with the massive gap you've made with a single Shadow Step. In these cases, either reserve both your bonus actions to double Shadow Step away, or utilize corners so that the AI would decide to just use dash.
Wonder if the gods are watching me.
Next up, Shadow Cloak Fight Resets. This is a broken combo that you can use to trivialize most fights in the game. First, start by initiating a surprise round. This basically gives you an extra turn to turn invisible after you made all your attacks in the initial turn. Then, use Cloak of Shadows to turn invisible, and then walk away from the spot you use Cloak of Shadows from, as enemies will try to use Detect Presence in the spot you were last seen. If you're near enough when they use this, they will be able to remove your invisibility. Also, be mindful of shadows, as stepping into the light will also remove your invisibility. Once they use Detect Presence and they fail to find you, the combat will end. You can then repeat the process and initiate a surprise round again. Rinse and repeat until everyone is dead. You can also use Minor Illusion as a great setup tool to group up enemies so that you can hit them all in the first turn. Darkness is a powerful spell, especially combined with the Eversight Ring from Act 2. This gives you a pocket of safety in locations that have no shadows. You can also use this to bug out the enemy AI, as they will sometimes fail to pathfind towards you when you're inside the darkness. Darkness also pretty much makes ranged enemies pass their turn when you're inside it. With these properties, you can use darkness to block out passageways and entrances to dissuade enemy AI, giving you and your party members a safe haven from attacks. For the rest of the skills, I admit I haven't used them as much as Cloak of Shadows, Shadow Step, and Darkness pretty much makes them irrelevant with how these 3 skills manipulate enemy AI. They are, however, good support tools in a 4-man parties. Silence is a good tool on a 4-man party playthroughs to disable enemy casters. Stunning strikes are a good stalling abilities that would disable priority targets, and pass without trace as a great way to surpass stealth checks. That pretty much sums up everything about this Shadow Monk guide. I hope you learned something, and maybe even be enticed to try the subclass yourself. If you'd like to see a specific fight, take a gander in my YouTube channel, as I did post almost all relevant fights in their post-Act 1. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll let this fight play out until the video ends. Take care.